Okay, so yes, thanks everyone for joining today. Um, so I am going to introduce scite. I'll first introduce myself, and then I'll walk through kind of the various features and benefits of how scite can help you do better research. And as I mentioned, I would love to have any questions, feedback, comments throughout. And so if you have a question immediately, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt, or you can wait till the end and I can take all of them at once, really whatever you guys prefer. Um, so my name is Josh Nicholson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of scite. I have a background in cell biology. I finished a PhD about 5 years ago from Virginia Tech here in the US. I'm now based in New York. The idea behind scite really borrows from my experience as a researcher, in that I knew within my field perhaps what had been tested and shown to be right or wrong, and what had not been. But if I left my immediate field, I wouldn't have this kind of insider information, and I'd be forced to rely upon kind of all the proxies of quality. Where is it published? Who are the authors? And then some metrics. And so we're really focused on citations, as our name suggests, and trying to bring in the next generation of citations. So instead of just saying this paper has 100 citations, we want you to be able to say it has 100 citations, 4 of them have supported it, 1 has contrasted it, the others have mentioned it in the method section, things like this. So providing more nuance to allow people to better interpret and understand studies. And so before I like to kind of start all these things, I like to really remind everyone that scientific publishing it can be onerous, it can be time consuming, it can be challenging. It's not always the most fun process of submitting, going through peer review. The costs are exorbitant at this point. But behind it, I think it's really amazing. So scientific publications, communicate new findings to the world, and those new findings range from the internet, vaccines, life-saving vaccines, which is really funny because I was giving this talk before COVID-19 and still had this slide. And so, through this time, we've come a long way. Telescopes, policy, government, all this stuff is informed by research. And not only is that research informing our day-to-day lives, but it informs future generations. And so that's another kind of amazing aspect of scientific publishing that I like to remind us on, because I think we get bogged down sometimes in the details. At the same time, there's a challenge with that. So there is a lot of content coming out. In biomedical literature alone, there's about 2 papers per minute. In all of publishing, this is about 4 papers per minute. And so it's a massive amount of information to stay up to date with and to understand and to read. In addition to doing that alongside other things, like actually doing the work, teaching or administration. And then at the same time, it's also potentially not as reliable as we would hope. And so there's been studies from large pharma and nonprofit consortia looking at major studies in these fields and then trying to reproduce them, and then more often than not, being unable to. And so this reproducibility is a problem, because if it's in Nature but someone else can't come to the conclusion, whether that's a big lab, a company, or whatnot, perhaps the findings are not robust enough, and perhaps they're not real. And so this is one thing that or these are 2 things that we're really trying to help improve upon, or if not solve at scite, is to make it easier to understand scientific research, and then to make it more reliable. And we want to do that by basically surfacing this information that's out there, but making it easier to digest and utilize. And so we've done that by focusing on
Josh,
citations. Yeah, go ahead.
may I ask you something in this point?
Of course.
You mentioned reproducibility crisis is very important, and then your product will be a solution for this problem. So I really wonder how you are going to solve this problem without research data.
I wouldn't say we're going to solve all of it. I think it's a complex problem, and there's a lot of it's multifactorial leading to this. And so the incentive structure in science is to get into these highly selective journals. To get into these highly selective journals, you need a flashy result, a surprising result. And I think this leads to incentivizes people to cut corners. And I don't think it's outright malicious fraud that is the problem here, but I think it's, these cutting of corners or leaving that experiment out, or kind of introducing bias this way, just because it's so competitive to get funding, to get into journals, that ultimately leads to this at scale. And I'll give you a personal example, actually, where this happened.
Okay.
And so during my PhD, I was looking at chromosome segregation defects. And basically what we did was put an extra chromosome into cells. And we're looking at, does this cause more missegregation defects? And what we found was, in these 4 cell lines, it increases the rate of chromosome segregation defects. In this other cell line, it didn't show that. And this other cell line, it didn't refute what the other one showed. It just showed that it wasn't this hard rule that if you add chromosomes, that you're going to see this increase in chromosome segregation. And so I wrote this up as a student. And when I presented it to my PI and my committee, they said, oh, no, leave that out because we need to get this past peer review. And so I think this, is I don't see as fraud, but I see as a bad behavior. And I think it happens at scale where we are, leaving out the experiments that didn't work, or the negative studies, if you will. And maybe we're even doing some things with our statistics. We're like, okay, let's look at this 1 tail versus 2 tail. And that is because you are rewarded, not necessarily for being right, but for getting it in this journal at kind of all costs. I'm trying to admit this person. And so I think, one thing that we want to do with that is basically to try to say, it's not about impact at all costs. It's really about, can you improve, can others validate what you've come to see? And so that was initially the idea behind scite, is trying to introduce this metric around reproducibility. I would say it's shifted a bit since then, and it's not just reproducibility. It's more so, can we surface this expert analyses and data that's out there to help people better understand and utilize this research. I don't know if that's a question or if it's just background. And so how does scite work? So speaking of my research, the way that I like to kind of show scite is to show the world as it exists without scite, and then to show it through the lens of scite. And so this is what I was just referring to. This is the study where we are looking at chromosome segregation defects in cancer cells and non-cancer cells to see, does aneuploidy increase the rate of chromosome missegregation? This work was ultimately published in eLife. As I mentioned, I did my PhD at Virginia Tech. We collaborated with the hospital in Portugal, as well as a lab in the NIH. It's been cited 49 times and then viewed just over 11,000 times. And so this is what we all look at when we first look at a scientific publication. Which journal is it in? Is it in a fancy journal? Is it in Cell, Nature Science? Is it a journal that I know? What are the affiliations? Are they from Harvard or MIT? Things like this. And then some metrics. How many times has it been viewed, cited, downloaded, and then increasingly alt metrics as well. And I would say in most cases, people are not really digging into this number. They're just utilizing it as a superficial number. So high is good, low is not so good. And that makes sense, because if you want to see what these 49 studies or reviews say about my work, you have to open all of them. And I've started to kind of like test this and see, how quickly would that be, say, if I wanted to open up 49 different studies. And in some cases, you'll run into a wall like this where you don't have access. So I don't have access to Scopus. So I'd have to basically copy and paste these titles, search them, and see if I can access it, then open the article, find where they mention my work in the article, and then read it. And I think at the quickest, when you have access, and you can do this through Google Scholar, it's about a minute per article. And so if you expand that to, say 50 or 60 citations, that's about an hour just to look at how one article has been cited. And that is, I would say, at the quickest end. It's probably more like multiple hours. And so people are not doing this, right? You're not opening 49 different studies, finding the in-text citation, reading it to say, what does the literature say about this article that I'm interested in? And that, to me, is a missed opportunity, because within those citing studies could be very valuable information. By definition, they're citing it, they're related. Maybe that work found something similar to what I found. Maybe they provide, more detailed analyses. Maybe they've looked in different cell lines or different systems. You don't know until you open that. And so we want to kind of change that by making this number easy to digest, by showing the citation context, and then organizing it by various different ways. And so we have this browser extension for Chrome, which I think is one of the best ways to passively and kind of easily use Scite, because it'll follow you anywhere you're reading the scientific literature online. So you can continue to use PubMed if you're using PubMed and it shows up there. You can just come to articles like eLife itself. So this only shows if you have the browser extension. It will show in reference sections. It will do this on Elsevier articles, Springer Nature articles. It'll work partially in Google Scholar, and then also in Web of Science and Scopus, and really kind of anywhere a DOI is linked. And this will provide you with our information next to this article that you maybe are interested in. And what you can do with it is not just say, okay, green must be good, but you can click it and it will bring you over to Scite. And what you'll see, different from other citation indices where they just show titles like this, is that you'll see the citation context. And so this excerpt of text comes from this full text of this citing article that was published 3 years after mine in Molecular Biology of the Cell. And so it's very easy to see, what does this article say about this article? You can just read it. So it says, in agreement with previous work, and then cites Nicholson et al., 2015, the trisoma clone showed similar aberrations, albeit to a lesser extent, supplemental figure S2b. And so really with one kind of click and much like basically 5 seconds, we're able to read what a citing article says and able to see that they are providing supporting evidence. So they're saying in agreement, and then they're indicating that here's the supporting evidence. And so to me, this is quite powerful way of better understanding the literature, interpreting results, and seeing, is this something that I should trust or not? In addition to just looking for supporting or contrasting citation statements, you can also search these snippets. So say I want to search, I'm not interested in just supporting or contrasting, but I'm interested in yeast in chromosome segregation. You can search for that here. You can see the blue is always the target citation, so the citation to my work. Maybe you want to see, what are these other 3 studies that someone is citing that's also with my work? Maybe these are other studies that I'm unaware of. And so here is one that's looking at, again, chromosome segregation in budding yeast. If you come back and select 11, you can see here, again, this is just like the finding that I found, the presence of extra chromosomes leads to genomic instability. And so this is a powerful way to not only kind of quickly see how a scientific paper has been studied, but then to kind of find some related work and then search for whatever you might be interested in. And personally, there's certain things that people will ask in my family about this treatment for this or that. And I'll come to the literature, and I'm not an expert, but I can easily kind of now search and see, what do experts and what does data say behind these things? And that relates to not just chromosome segregation defects, but really kind of everything, because scientific publications or research publications relate to everything. And so this is, I would say, the main kind of value add of Scite, is that you can see the citation context. You can see where that citation context comes from. So this appears in the results section from this article. You can see who the citing authors are. If they're a self-cite, we'll flag that. And then we provide this deep learning model that classifies the citation statement as supporting, contrasting, or mentioning. We have other filters, though, that I think are also equally as important. So say you want to see recent publications, you can slide this over, and this will limit to more recent articles, so 2020. If you are the author of this, you can set up email alerts. So this will send you an email if you turn on that alert when there is a new citation to your work. And so this is a powerful way to see how others are citing your work and stay on top of that without having to come and search all this every time.
Josh, may I ask something?
Please.
What is the main differences between mentioning and supporting?
Yeah, so mentioning is kind of our default. It's kind of neutral. And
what do you mean?
So to be honest, mentioning could be a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. Mentioning could be, we could classify mentioning further into different types. What we're looking for with our deep learning model is, does this citation statement, so does the sentence where this is linked, does it it indicate that they're supporting the citation and that there's supporting evidence? And so the way that we've trained this model was to basically look at text like this, unlabeled, without anything, read it as experts, so as PhDs or MDs on the team, and say, okay, they're saying in agreement with previous work. So they're supporting Nicholson, right? They're agreeing with it. And then they're saying the trisomal clone shows similar aberrations, albeit to a lesser extent. So they're supporting it, but then they're also indicating that they're supporting it with evidence. And so we would classify that as supporting. And what we've done is basically to read roughly 50,000 of these citation statements as humans, manually, quite laboriously, and it took over, basically about 2 years to do this. Read this as humans and say, okay, these authors are indicating that they provide supporting evidence or that they provide contrasting evidence. And if it's neither of those, it's just going to be called mentioning. And so that is, how we've trained this deep learning model so that we can classify these citation statements as scale, because 50,000, while it's a lot, is not, 800 and where are we at today? It's not 881 million citation statements. And so this is necessary, I think, to have this machine go over, millions of articles and millions of citation statements, because without a machine, it's virtually impossible unless you employed kind of the entire world to do it.
As far as I understand, for the future, new classification will come for the mentioning.
I think so. There's more possibility, yes. So mentioning could be certain other things. And I think we want to be very careful about what we introduce and when we introduce it, because we don't want to add too much confusion. And also, we want to be careful about classifying these citation types. So we think it's easier to say this paper has been supported by experimental evidence than it is to say this paper has been supported by opinion. And so we're not just looking at positive or negative sentiment. And I think sometimes there can be some confusion around that, because people say, oh, they're citing this paper in a nice way. And I'll say, yes, they are citing this paper in a nice way, but they're not indicating that they actually support it. And I think that's a different level of evidence. And right now, we'd rather have the bar be higher, saying, okay, if this is going to be a supporting citation statement, it's because they present supporting evidence or analysis or data. But mentioning could certainly be other things. And another thing, which I think we can also kind of these are not classified as citation types, but you could say, these are discussion citation types, right? They all appear in the discussion. They're all discussing the work. And so you don't need necessarily deep learning model to say, here's a citation type where they're discussing the work. Here's a citation type where they are potentially utilizing the methods. And things like this. And so I think these paper sections is one thing we want to kind of emphasize a bit more, because I think it's really powerful. Again, these are powerful citation types to quickly look at that, but so are these. Say you're a student or you're new to this field and you want to see how have experts, people that are citing this work that have passed peer review, how are they referring to this? And I think that's one thing that we've really kind of come to understand is a big use, especially by students, is this is a way to see, how do experts understand this study that I need to understand, that I need to interpret. And so looking at the discussion citation type, if you will, would be a powerful way to do that.
If I would like to have any score for any article, is it easy to calculate if any citation coming from the intro, coming from the discussion, this article good or this article bad? This article valuable more than this?
Yeah, so we've kind of limited. So initially the idea was to have a single score around a publication, and we called this the R factor. And when we started to go out and give talks to researchers, I mean, there was pretty strong pushback, because I think researchers, they don't want to be judged by this individual number, right? Like what they currently are today, right? Highly cited. And so we've kind of dropped that for individual, or we have dropped that for individual articles and researchers. It exists still for journals where, we think it's kind of necessary to add some complement to the impact factor. But really, you can also kind of just look at this yourself and say, this paper has 62 mentioning citations, 3 supporting, it's been cited by 60 papers, and you can come to your own conclusion. And I think what is important though, is that, not all supporting citations are equal either, right? In one case, they can say, we reproduced every detail of this study, Nicholson et al. In another case, they could say, we found part of this work to be true. And so I think that's important because we show not only, just paper to paper citations, but we show multiple citations where they've, in this case, they've just mentioned my work, and in this case, they've supported it. And so that nuance is important. And I think we don't want to kind of lose that nuance by just showing an individual number and saying, this person's good, this person's bad, because I don't think it's that simple. And in some cases, really, sometimes when I see a contrasting citation, it's just one, and then I will change, it'll have 20 supporting citation statements, but one contrasting. If I read it and it looks strong enough and it sounds like they've really tested this, it will change my interpretation of that study. And I think it's hard to kind of expand that to a rule and say, this ratio means it's good, this ratio means it's bad. And so we really want to encourage people to actually read these things as opposed to just looking at these numbers. And we think we do that by making it pretty easy. One thing I should say though is, this deep learning model, while it's classifying this one correctly, and that's pretty easy to see, it's not always the case, right? It's very hard to have a machine interpret what a scientific statement has said and to say, does this provide supporting or contrasting evidence? And we are kind of one of the first ones to do this, but people have been suggesting this for years, even back to the 60s. And so it's not perfect, and it will never be perfect. And I think it's important to kind of understand that. And that also relates to the fact of we don't want people to be judged by this individual number because it's not perfect. And so next to each citation statement is this link that says flag misclassified cite. And so what you can do is if you read this and you're saying, okay, this doesn't look like it's supporting, or this doesn't look like it's mentioning, you can provide feedback to the system and say, this cite should actually be mentioning. And you can say, this should be mentioning because, and then introduce some other quote. And then this will be reviewed by us basically, within a day and accepted or rejected. And that's important because that provides feedback for users to have this kind of hybrid system of human as well as machine looking at these citation statements. And I think we will expand that. That'll allow authors to provide even more nuance on these things. And so that's really kind of like where we're going, is trying to provide more nuance as opposed to just providing more numbers. So that you can better understand the literature. So continuing, down here, I was highlighting the fact that you can organize by where the citations appear, and that's pretty powerful. And I think, generally supporting the contrasting, and a lot of interesting statements come from these two regions because that's when they're qualifying it in terms of their results, or they're discussing in light of their results. But you can also start to break this down by article types. And so articles are traditional peer-reviewed articles. We are regularly ingesting preprints now from bioRxiv, medRxiv, Archive, Research Square, places like this. And this is important because preprints are now gaining a lot of popularity. And it's important to stay on top of the literature there, and also important to see how preprints themselves have been cited. And then, of course, it's important to kind of understand, okay, is this a supporting cite from the same lab, or is it a supporting cite from a different lab? And so we flag citations as self-citations if they share an author, or independent if they don't. And one thing that I can say, which I think is quite powerful, is if I see a study that has been contrasted, but it's been contrasted by the same group, I almost start to trust that group more, because they're not just putting up this study and saying it's the best study in the world, it's great, blah, blah, blah. They're really trying to come to this conclusion. So they're even citing their work and showing differences against this. And I think that, to me, is where you can have a contrasting cite, and it will lead to more trust in this research or this research group. And so I think that's very powerful. And so this is the core of scite, is showing how citations, or how scientific papers have been cited. And then everything is kind of built around that. And so I'm going to walk through a few other things to show how we can help, not just looking at individual article, but looking at groups of articles, looking at articles that are unpublished, and staying on top of things like that. And so down here, we have the ability to visualize reports. And so this will be just a visual representation of what you just saw. One key difference here, though, is that we're showing, both directions. So we're showing citations coming from my paper, as well as showing citations to my paper. And so here's an arrow. There's my paper. Here is a citation from me to Gao in 2007. And you can click here and see basically what did I write. And it says these findings support previous studies showing that aneuploidy directly affects transcript and protein levels in various systems. And so I am supporting that work, and you can see that by the color. It was a green edge. And so these are all supporting citation statements. The blue or contrasting citation statements where you can look at these things and see that there's differences. And so this one, is, I don't want to read everyone, but it says at the end, we think that the two phenotypes we observe in our study are independent of each other. And so it's talking about where these are linked, and then we're saying we think they're independent. And then if you want to see all sites, you can expand that. And the size of this node will relate to how many citations this paper has received. And you can even start to expand these things to look at multiple papers. And so this is a visual representation of citation networks. And I think this is our first step. There's a lot more that we can do with these so that you can better understand a field of work. The red ones, just while I'm showing you, will indicate that there's either a retraction or that there's a correction or something like this. And so this is, again, kind of an interesting way of looking at citation networks and kind of looking at a field in general. And I think it's most powerful if you don't show mentioning sites, because then it becomes easier to digest. And you can see without a mentioning site, there's no links between these two things. And so that is something that we're expanding to not just look at individual articles, but to start to allow authors to look at their own network, so their citation network from work that they've done, and then to start to look at groups of articles. And so I think these groups of articles is something that is also very valuable, and that we found large companies to really find interest and value in, but also individuals. And so I'm going to walk everyone through now how you can use Scite to best look at groups of articles. Say you're new to a topic area and you want to understand it, and then to set up alerts to stay on top of this. So if we search chromosome missegregation here, you can see that we identify 533 articles where chromosome missegregation is mentioned in the title or the abstract. And so we're not doing full text search here, mostly just because it's really expensive and we're a small team. Over time, I think we can do a full text search, and I think that'll be even more powerful. But right now, it's just looking at, here are articles where chromosome missegregation is mentioned in the title or the abstract. You can limit these things and say, I'm interested in chromosome missegregation, and I'm interested in articles that were published in 2010 afterwards. And you'll see this are now 2018, 2011, 2013, and that narrowed the result. You can order these things and say, I want to see the most supported article from 2010 where chromosome missegregation's mentioned. And what you'll see here is that this paper in Nature has 1,800 citations, paper citations, 92 supporting citations, 2,200 mentioning citations. So again, a paper can cite another paper multiple times, and then 6 contrasting. And so this is a powerful way to kind of look at topics and diseases or whatever you're interested in and quickly understand that. And then over here, there's a lot of control that you can apply to this. So you can filter by year, you can filter by journal, you can filter by author type, things like this. One thing that is new since we last spoke and since I last showed Scite is that we now show authors. So if you want to search a topic and see which author has the most articles that match this criteria, you can do this here. And going back to, let's remove this. This is my PhD advisor. So if you search chromosome missegregation and say, I want to see the researcher that has the most articles mentioning chromosome segregation, you'll see that Daniela Chimina, who is my PhD advisor, she has the most articles there. And so this is a powerful way to not only understand the literature better, but to better identify, leaders within the field, and leaders however you define it. So you can choose, I want to say chromosome missegregation. I want to see only publications that have at least one supporting site. And you'll see this narrows the results. and it'll narrow the publications here. Daniela Cimini, Angelica Amon, these are all, you know, leaders kind of in the field. And you can say, okay, maybe one supporting site and no contrasting sites. And so this further narrows it, and it'll change these things. And so you really have a lot of control looking at different topics and saying, okay, this is what I'm interested in. And I want to better understand these areas, better understand the researchers. And I want to basically be alerted when there's a new article matching this criteria that I've set, or a new citation. And so we have this ability to save your search results, which is, okay, I want to enable email alerts for when there's new citations to any of these 192 publications, or there's new publications matching this criteria. And that is a powerful way to, I think, understand a field and to stay on top of a field. And I think there's more things that we can do there. In addition to this, and let me just take this off, we also have the ability to look at this information, the citation information in aggregate. And so here, let's let this go. It's a little slow. So here again is chromosome misaggregation. It's filtered by articles where there's at least one supporting citation statement, and then there's no other restrictions. So to say I want to see this information in aggregate, and maybe I want to compare two different groups. What you can do is create a custom dashboard. And here you can also save the search query, and you can also turn on email alerts if you want. I'm going to turn them off. And you can hit save. And basically what we're doing here is creating this report that is going to group these 257 publications together, and then show you the total aggregate information. So how many articles there are, how many citations there are there any retractions, are there any corrections, and you can also see some of that here. And then you can also filter within that. And this is, there we go, a little slow. So here is this dashboard that I made, chromosome segregation. You can change the title if you want. You can delete the dashboard. It shows the articles. It shows the total breakdown of citations at this group level, the number of editorial notices, and then something we call the scite index. And so this will show, you know, generally, are there more supporting or less supporting citations over time? And you can show this within these 2-year windows, 5-year windows, or a lifetime. And so this will be, you know, basically looking at different time windows over the course of the last, you know, basically almost 20 years, to see, is this field, you know, receiving more support or less? And maybe you can use this to also compare two different fields. And I think it's just a better way to kind of look at this stuff in aggregate. And then if you scroll down, you can also see, okay, here is the most supported article in that group. And you can filter on these things. Here's the most supported article in that group where there's no contrasting sites, changes this. And we've just added this to show, again, not just the citation statements, but also the publications. And I think that's important, because one thing that we've done recently is to not just show citation statements, but is to also show traditional citations. And so to do what we do, we need access to full text, and not everything in the world is open and free to just analyze. And so we've worked with about a dozen different publishers to gain access to this content, but there's still cases, articles, millions of articles where we don't have access. And so in that case, we just show a traditional citation, and this comes from Crossref's open citations that has really good coverage now, because Elsevier is now actually depositing their references. And so we have this comprehensive solution looking at traditional citations, so kind of what most citations are showing. And then we have more citation statements than anyone in the world, so you can see how something has been cited. And so we've just started to surface that here, so you can look at, okay, maybe I'm interested in citing publications, or maybe Scite doesn't have good coverage in this area. I can still see this information. And again, this is a very useful way, I think, for understanding kind of a field or a new topic, whether you're a student or you're an expert. And so we see this by students, you know, coming to do dissertation work, but we also see this by large pharma companies that are interested in tracking research related to this drug and whatnot. And I think, you know, there's more room to do other things here to better allow you to understand this field. And so I could see us adding visualizations to visualize these 257 articles, adding author information here to see, okay, who are the top authors in this field, so on and so forth. And we'll continually, improve that. And we would love feedback on basically all aspects of the site if you have any questions or kind of feedback there. So that's a way to create a custom dashboard based on your interest. Say you're interested in looking at a journal. So we have this ability to look at aggregate information at the journal level, and you can filter these things here. So say I want to see which journal has the most citations according to Scite. So the most is PNAS, then Nature, then Science. And you can also filter by which one has the most supporting citations, which might also be PNAS. You can look at the Scite index. So again, this is looking at the ratio. And so let's look at the one with the most, with the highest Scite index in 2 years. So this is math. And what I can tell you is math and physics have a lot of supporting citation statements, which I think makes sense with our tool and also reflects very well our different disciplines. And what you can do is you can simply open these things. And so again, this will show the same information, total number of articles, citation types, editorial notices. You can set alerts if you want. And then you can see the Scite index and how things are changing. And you can better understand these journals and be like, oh, is this a journal that I should submit to? Is this a journal that I trust? It really just to kind of give this extra information beyond just the impact factor to anyone that's kind of interested in. Another thing that we've recently added, and this is still a little bit of a work in progress because we're still adding data to this, is university dashboards. And so you can, again, filter by all these things. You can look at any university that you're interested in. So let's look at Virginia Tech, where I did my PhD. And you can open these things, and sometimes they're a little slow to initially open, and see this information at the university level. And so this is, again, still populating with data, but it still has a lot of data right now. And it'll show, here's the total number of articles that we could identify that came from this university. Here's the breakdown of these. Here's editorial notices. Here's what the citation record looks like over time. And then once this loads, you'll be able to, again, quickly identify, like, what is the most supported article from this? And I think that is useful and interesting for a lot of different use cases. And this could be, a way to kind of find, if you're a student, a lab that maybe I want to join, I want to check this work of this researcher. If you're at a library, understanding the research coming out of your organization, or if you're an administrator as well. And that's new and something that we found universities to really like. We also have this at the funder level. And I'll just, I don't need to keep walking through it because it's all basically the same thing. But the funder level will say, if there's a national institute in Turkey, or if you want to look at how private companies have funded, you can search these here and see that information as well. And so really what we're doing is, we have this new way, this new type of citation. We're applying it to the article. We're applying it to journals. We're applying it to topics and fields. We're really applying it to everywhere citations exist today already. And we're trying to take it, one step further. A few other things. So we have the ability to kind of create a custom dashboard from our search, as I showed, but you can also import your reference manager, Zotero or Mendeley. We also have a plugin for Zotero, which will show this information directly within Zotero. So here is that information within Zotero. And so you can check before you add this reference while you're going to cite. Maybe you want to see, what does that one say? And so this will be, view Scite report, and that will take you to Scite, and you can quickly see these things. So that's useful for individuals or for groups that are writing a paper. And then we have this reference check, which actually has a bug this morning, so I'm not going to show it. But basically what the reference check does is allows you to upload a PDF or a Word document. We will automatically identify the in-text citations and then tell you, reference 1 that you're using has been contrasted, or it's been retracted, or reference 3, things like this. And again, this is, I just ran into a bug this morning with it, so we're going to fix that. But that should be back today. And so I'm going to stop there because I think, I'd love to hear questions and feedback and answer anything that you guys might have. And I would say thanks, everyone, for listening and walking through all of this with me. I think you should.
It's really nice, really nice.
Thank you
very much.
think if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself probably and ask it.
Tukan Hocam.
So I asked my questions last time.
Yeah.
But I invited my PhD students. So we really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. Hopefully we are going to go deep in computer science, because your examples are from more like medical field.
Yeah.
So I really want to experience how it goes with computer science, but we'll let you know.
Yeah, so I can tell you a little. It's better in biomedical than computer science, and that's mostly a reflection of access. So we don't have an agreement with IEEE, for example, and so we don't have full text of IEEE articles or ACM articles and things like this.
Okay.
And so those are big limitations. We do have traditional citations, and so you'll see that, but that's what other citation tools have as well. And so this is, a long-term goal of ours, is to be able to analyze every publication. But obviously, these groups are used to selling this content for a lot of money. And so it's will take some time, but I think, we've made good progress and we'll continue to make good progress. And as we sign indexing agreements with new publishers, it always helps with other publishers. And so we have a few coming up with this is Psychology, APA, also AAAS, and then we've been talking to Springer Nature for quite some time, which would also help with computer science. And so there are certain limitations. And I think, computer science is one where obviously a lot of members of the team have computer science backgrounds.
Yes.
And so it's one that we try very hard to get. And one that we'll continue to kind of push for to get. It's just, it takes some time to set some of those relationships up. But thanks. And yeah,
thank
please
you.
do test it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another thing I can say is once you're logged in, this is what your kind of hub will look like. So you can see your bio. You can, one thing that we're doing actually right now, which I think will be quite cool, is right now this shows, okay, here's how many articles I have. Here's how many citations I have. It doesn't show how I've cited other people. And so we have that information, and we're going to show not only how I have been cited, but how do I cite others. And I think that'll be really interesting to say, for authors to look at, this is one paper you've cited a lot. This is one paper you've contrasted.
Yes.
And I think it'll give this extra information that you really kind of can't get anywhere else. And you can also say, like, I cite more open access articles than closed articles. Kind of all this information we're starting to surface to allow authors to not just look at, how others have cited them, but allow them to kind of look at themselves and say, how do I cite others? And then to make sure it's, actually correct. And so that's one thing that we're working on. We just started on yesterday. And we'll, if you have feedback on different things that you'd want to see, please let me know. And I think we can start to surface that. But you can look at your profile. You can have a public profile. You can sync your articles from ORCID. This is the public profile. Here's where all my dashboards are that I've created. You can open those and save them. Reference checks as well. Save searches, and you can turn off the alerts here. Alerts also, it will show the different alerts that I have. So these I do get a lot of emails now because I've set up some. If you have any, if you want to kind of go through some of these things again without me, obviously we're recording this, we'll make that available. But there's also some guides here. So here's how to set up topic notifications. Here's how to create dashboards. Here's how to use our reference check. And here's kind of how to use reports. And then you can invite colleagues and things like this. And so, yeah, we'll continue to improve. And definitely, if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to email us directly. And we listen to that. Or we even have a little help bubble. And you can say, hey, this is not working or this is unclear. And then we generally answer pretty quickly if it's normal business hours for us.
How many researchers bio inside of the site?
How many researchers have signed up on site? Or?
Yeah.
It's today is about, I think, 32,000. And so it's growing rapidly. A lot of it is students recently, which is surprising. We've done quite well on TikTok, which I was not expecting at all. But there's a lot of students in the UK especially, which is, again, we have more users in the UK than in the US. And that's because a lot of students are using it. And I think it makes sense because students, they're not experts in their field, but they're often tasked with looking at this research, interpreting it, writing an essay about it, and scite can help a lot with that. We are, starting to grow though. And I think one thing that will allow that is we now show our information directly on the version of record on a lot of publications. And so we're live on 100+ journals on Wiley. And so if you look at Wiley and one of the journals is displaying our information, you'll be able to see that. And so here is, here, let's look at this one, Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning in Spine Research. So I think this is one of their highly cited ones. And you can see this is what they've traditionally shown. They're now showing this information. And so that is drawing a lot more people to the tool, and they're starting to learn. And again, like this is starting to show up in different areas. This is at university repositories like this. You can see this information. Oops, no, that's not the one I want to look at. You can see our information embedded there alongside other citation tools. And we've just added the citing publication. And that is our strategy, is really to kind of stay focused on what we do, which is challenging enough in itself, and to enhance all these other tools and services and workflows that already exist by displaying that information. We make that available via our badge, which can be added for free and pretty easily. And it can be customized. So this could be added in a university repository or search system, and you can choose to show it horizontally. You can choose to show it when there's no citations. By default, it hides. You can add type labels, things like this, and then it's just this little snippet of text. And so that is kind of how we think we'll grow, is by getting this information out there, not requiring everyone to come to scite and learn about us, but starting to get this information out there in different systems and tools and services. And we've done a lot of partnering with other tools and groups now to add that. And it's pretty exciting because I think, we're on 100+ journals on Wiley, which is hundreds of thousands of articles, which, I think takes us from kind of this interesting startup on the side doing something to really taking the next step to like, okay, here's how citations are going to go. Whether that's us or someone else, I think inevitably citations will look something like what we're doing. Just because they provide so much more information than what we're actually showing now.
Very nice. Also, we're planning to add this batch to our institutional repository.
So you guys,
yeah,
you guys would add this. We're certainly glad to help. We also have an API that researchers can use for bibliometric analyses. I think there's a lot of fascinating things that could be done here. You could look at, does data availability statements lead to more supporting citations, things like this. There's interesting studies that could be looked at around gender. Do male or female receive more supporting citations? Basically, all these things that we've done with traditional citations could now be looked at through this new light. And obviously, we can't do all of that ourselves. So we're happy to make this API available for research purposes as well as other purposes. And we're starting to see more of these studies come to light, and I think that's really exciting. One thing is that we've also written a preprint, which has received some positive reviews, so hopefully it'll be published soon, detailing, how have we built scite? How can this be useful? And so I think that's important to kind of better understand the system, the limitations, understanding the context of other research, and that's available at bioRxiv, and hopefully will be available once it's accepted by this journal soon. Okay, if there's nothing else, yeah, I mean, I would continue to encourage you guys just to email us if thoughts come or questions, or to write through the little help bubble, and we generally answer pretty quick. And then to test the tool and use it. So it's not just looking at individual articles. You can test these dashboards. Reference check is down right now, but that should be fixed. Maybe it's fixed already. I'd have to look at Slack. To try out all these different things and yeah, love to work kind of with you guys more as opposed to like, here's a service, just use it type of relationship.
Okay.
Okay. I will stop
We
sharing
will,
screen
we will
and
work.
yeah, thanks everyone so much for joining and thanks for organizing this as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you very much.
Okay.